Good morning and welcome to the Respond Customer Service webinar series. This takes place the second Tuesday of the month. We're glad you've joined us. My name's Sherry Lane. I'm part of the marketing team and I'm going to be handing things over to Kathy here in just a second, but I do want to remind you that you are welcome and invited and encouraged to enter questions at any time. By joining these live events, you've got the advantage of asking Kathy your specific questions. So when you do, at any point during Kathy's presentation, feel free to enter those questions into the question area of the dashboard. And if that dashboard collapses at any point during Kathy's presentation, you can click on that red arrow and that will expand it. So with that, let me hand things over to Kathy. Good morning, Kathy.
Good morning, Sherry, and thank you very much for that introduction. Hi, everybody. It's cold in Iowa. I believe the temperature this morning, the real outside temperature was like -5 degrees, and they're saying with the wind chill, it's about a -15. So if some of you are down in those southern states or somewhere where it's a lot warmer, I'm envious. Today, we are going to talk about some of the common year-end reports, and many of you run all sorts of different reports at the end of the year, so I have reached out to a few different customers and asked, what are you really looking for and what's important for you to gather? So that said, I'm going to cover several of the reports that I was told were really important. The first one is your accounts receivable. That can be found from the aging report. Typically, with this aging report, we'd be looking at what does our AR look like on a specific day. For that, we just need a summary report. We would not need the call or the patient detail. I've chosen summary, and next on my flexible filters tab, I'm going to choose my report as of date. And because we're not quite to the end of the year, I'm going to fudge it just a little bit, and I am going to run this report as of 12/31/16. So again, this is going to be a snapshot of what my accounts receivable look like on that specific date. Remember, with this aging report, we do have some options as to how those aging buckets look. So we can use it, the report by aging date, which tends to be our call date. More commonly, people like to see this report based on the last time we got payment. Especially if you have a lot of those calls that might be in litigation or might be auto or workers' comp, which take a little bit longer to get that first payment. If you run it by last payment date, some of those calls may not look so upside down. When we go to the summary tab, this is where we can choose, well, what do we want to see? Again, most commonly we would look at who owes us the money, and for this example, we don't need this schedule event. Again, we can put in our HIPAA reason, TPO for treatment, payment, and operational purposes, and who's looking at this, maybe billing staff. So again, when I run this report, I am in a sample database, so keeping that in mind. In this database, it shows that I do have 40 calls outstanding with balances, and again, it shows the aging buckets, current, 30 to 60, so on and so forth, and then our grand total. When I'm looking at this report, I do see that I have a couple of calls that seem to have balances on them, but when I'm looking at the criteria of payer, they don't have a payer on them. And so that would be a red flag for me to go find out, oh, maybe I should find out why I don't have payers on those calls, and should I be able to fix them? So again, just at a glance, I see that this is a pretty big red flag. Again, since this is a sample database, we have most of our calls over 180, but in your real databases, more of them would be in this middle section here. How I would find those calls that have a payer of none would be to run a detail report. Keeping the same parameters, I simply would come and choose call detail, and on my detail options, I'd want to make sure that I was running that by payer as well. Now when I run that report, those two calls that have none as a payer on them would be visible up at the top, and I could go into those calls and find out why they don't have a payer on them. So somebody didn't finish them, they're probably still in an upload schedule or a beginning schedule, and we'd want to go in and finish those calls so we could get the bill out the door, especially for this Joe Bowen, which might be still within timely filing. So that's the first report, our aging report, which again is a snapshot of what our accounts receivable looks like. The next report that people told me they're interested in is how many calls did they have during the year. And so we could actually run, again, just a summary report based on the call date. So putting in our 2016 dates, again, a summary, and what would you like to see that summary by? If all you're interested in is the number of calls, we could just run it by company and run a report and see how many calls we had with a 2016 date. So again, you can see this database had 25 calls. We may want to see how many calls were entered in 2016 versus how many have a call date of 2016. And sometimes this call date of 2016 report is ran maybe in March because you might be behind in your billing. If you want to see the actual work that was accomplished, that would be call date entered. Again, that's when the keystrokes happened. Another thing we could do is we could actually compare our years. So we know that we had 25 in 2016, so maybe we would like to compare that to 2015. So by simply changing the date range, we can run that same report, and we see that in 2015 we had 28 calls. So really easy to do a comparison. If we wanted more data from that report, maybe our payer mix, maybe the schedules that we used. If we're doing manual data entry, maybe we want to know the entered by user. We can simply change one item on the summary options tab, and we see a different layout of results. So in this case, again, I'm looking at the current payer, and I have 8 calls that don't have a payer assigned yet. Notice the balances are 0, so I would assume that those are calls that had just gotten maybe uploaded or imported, and I haven't worked them yet. So that report shows us then how many calls we had during a specific time frame. Another call report that is one of my favorites, and I think some of our trainers' favorites, is the report that looks at all of the calls sitting in no bill sent. Remember how your billing schedules work, and at the beginning of almost every billing schedule there's an event that says no bill sent. It means we haven't done a billing action yet. It's sort of that holding place, and we like to think that we don't have very many calls sitting there. So this is a good report to run at the end of a billing cycle. Once you've done all of your electronic batches, once you've printed all the batches of your 1500 forms and your white paper forms, we would want to run this report just looking at the current event of no bill sent. We would have a balance that is ignored, and we'd want to look at what schedule our calls are in to ensure we haven't missed any calls. So in this case, it shows me that I have 3 calls in my insurance paper. I have 1 making payment, 1 in Medicaid paper, 8 in Medicare electronic. So this would be a red flag to me if I had just billed or thought I had billed out all of my calls. So again, this is a nice report to run to ensure you don't have any black holes sitting out there, you don't have any calls that are stuck, or that someone really is truly printing batches and not single printing, and that they're doing those electronic claims frequent enough. So again, that's our no bill sent report. Another pretty critical report that not only would you run at the end of the year, but I'm guessing most of you would be running throughout the year, would be a follow-up or a review type report. So I have a report set up. It's called Follow-up Needed. I have it set as both a detail and a summary type report. On my basic filters tab, you'll notice I'm running this report wide open. I don't have any call dates on it. I also am looking at a call balance that would be above 0. And for my events, I am looking at those review and follow-up type events. So I have my follow-up Medicaid, Medicare, Railroad. I have review, time to review. So I have those last safety net type events all keyed in this report. On the detail options, I'm looking at the current payer, and on the summary options, I'm looking at what schedule they're in for the beginning of this report. So when we run it, we can see that we have 13 calls that are Medicare calls with balances. So we could easily take a quick look here and see, gosh, there are still ones that are in timely filing. I maybe need to make some phone calls or do some follow-up on those Medicare calls to ensure that I get the money. I also could look back at a couple of them that are from maybe 2013 or 2014 and make a determination. Do we write those off? Is there something going on with those that we're still trying to appeal? So that I know what's happening with those calls as well. The summary part of that also show me then where those review type calls are sitting, one with Medicaid, one Medicare paper, and 12 Medicare electronic. And then it shows me the total of the 14 calls and what the balances are. So this is a really helpful report. Again, most people do run this report almost on a weekly basis so that they stay on top of those calls that need to be reviewed, but most certainly you'd want to look at this at the end of the year as well. The next report I'm going to talk about is the timely filing. We know that we have timely filing deadlines for a lot of our major payers, and we'd want to see what calls maybe past timely filing, because they do affect your accounts receivable. If you have calls, especially those Medicaid and Medicare calls that have balances on them and they're sitting in your program with those balances and they're maybe 2, 3, and 4 years old, and you know that you're not going to collect on them, but perhaps your board of directors is making some assumptions based on your accounts receivable that you have all this money out there. Is it collectible or not? This would be the time to be looking at those calls. Should they be written off? Are there 10 calls that need to be written off, or do you have 2,000 calls that need to be written off? And if so, who makes the decision on when they get written off, and what is that total dollar amount? So again, to find those calls, a simple call report will help you with that as well. On that call report, again, I would just be starting with a summary, and I would want to look at all calls back to a certain time frame. So if I were looking at timely filing of a year, I could go ahead and put in my 12/31/2015 date. So I'd be looking at all calls up to 12/31/15. And then I'd like to see those calls with a balance above something. Do I want to look at a balance above 100, a balance above 200, or balance above 0? Then I'd also want to know what my payer mix is for those specific calls. So I'd be looking at the current payer. And again, this will show me those calls that are sitting out there. So I have 23 calls. Here's my payer mix that were dated before 12/31/2015. So in theory, for some of these, they may be ones I'd want to consider for write-offs, or I'd want to go in and look and see if there's something going on that I can still get my money. Again, to find out who they are, I simply would keep the same parameters, check on detail, come to my details options and choose current payer, and run the report again. And now it does show again those two that didn't have a payer. I have one AARP from 2015. I have 2 Blue Cross Blue Shield from 2015. I have 1 Medicaid from 2015. And then I have several Medicares. And again, I have a Medicare from 2013, a couple from 2014. So what's our company's policy on those particular calls? If they're not in litigation, we just simply miss them. Who makes the decision of writing them off and getting them off of your books so that your AR looks more correct? So again, this helps us determine those calls that may have been past the timely filing deadlines for your major payers. Another report that is one of my very favorite reports at the end of the year is the Coda Analysis report. And when we come to the Coda Analysis report, we can simply select our date range. Again, choosing 2016 dates. And then what codes do we want to analyze? Sometimes we like to look at our charge codes or our credit codes. Maybe we want to look at our drop-off locations. Maybe we want to look at our pickup locations as well. I would use this report to look at my pickup locations to see if I had any calls that were picked up at a hospital. Are you auditing those calls that were picked up at a hospital to see if they were billed as an emergency call? And if so, were they correctly billed as an emergency call? And so we'll be talking about that here in just a minute. So the Coda Analysis report allows us to choose multiple codes to analyze. And when we run this report, what we will get then is an analysis of the charges we used, the credits that were posted, our drop-off locations, and our pickup locations. Now you could use this also on any of the other codes you did see in that list, such as your staff members, to get a quick snapshot of how many calls your staff members went on, or maybe the most popular ambulance or unit if you're getting ready to replace one. So again, very quickly, we can use the Coda Analysis report and it can show us a lot of different information. Now I do show that we had a call that was picked up at Avera St. Luke's Hospital. So if I wanted to do an audit of an internal audit myself of calls picked up at a hospital, again, I could use my call report for that. So on my basic filters tab, I could put in then the year of 2016. On my flexible filters tab, I could choose my pickup location. And we saw that it was the Avera St. Luke's Hospital that we picked up at. And I can run that report to find out, well, how many were there that were picked up there. And we did have the one call that was picked up at that hospital. So if I were doing an internal audit, I could come in and I could pull in that call and take a look at it. So in this instance, the call says that it was picked up at a hospital. I can look at my department, which indicates we went to the emergency room. We said bill is emergency, yes. We can just follow through here and see, okay, we went 4.3 miles. I see who was on there. CMS service level, which pulls from my charge code, said I billed it BLS emergency. When I look at my times, well, this looks a little off. My call time was 9:05 in the morning, so that's when the call came in, but we didn't dispatch the rig until 11:16. So right there, that kind of is a red flag to me that maybe this was a scheduled call for a transfer. When I come to my reasons tab and see what we've got on here, it shows that we have a person that had right hip pain and contusion on the right hip, and they were transferred to an orthopedic specialist for a possible hip fracture or repair to an existing prosthetic. This is that kind of giving me even a bigger red flag than when I look at my charges and I see it was billed as an emergency. I look at my ambulance certification questions and I see that the patient was transported to a specialist, and I'll see if I have any narrative, and my narrative indicates I have a male that had a possible hip fracture or repair to existing prosthetic. They were given some morphine prior to transport, and they rested without incident during transport. So again, I probably would want to pull out my patient care report and see if I had any other information on this. I'm going to go ahead and look at the patient side just to see if maybe I have a physician certification statement and this really should have been billed as a non-emergent call. And actually, I do have a physician certification statement that said it was a transfer for ortho care. So this is a way that you can audit, do a self-audit of your own calls. Again, this example was I picked calls picked up at a specific hospital, knowing that those hospital calls sometimes are not emergency calls. So those are some of the most common year-end reports. We also, of course, want to do our balancing at the end of the year, and to do so, I always suggest that we come to Help, Documentation. We use the Billing Station drop-down, And under reports, you'll find balancing the billing database. And we suggest that you balance using log dates. And the reason we suggest balancing using log dates is because log dates in the computer or in the program are the computer date, meaning they're hard-coded and they can't be changed. Where a receive date or an enter date can be changed, the log dates cannot. Again, financial balancing of the program can be done on a monthly basis. It can be done on a quarterly, semi-annually, but most importantly, if you haven't done them every month or every quarter, you'd want to do it at the end of the year. This gives you an overview or a snapshot of how you would take your accounts receivable balance from the previous month, add in your charges, subtract out your credits, run your new aging report or accounts receivable report, and those balances then should equal 0. We also do have a worksheet that you can print out that also walks you through all of it, a place to put the month, the year, and to keep track of your numbers. So again, balancing your database at least once a year, if not on a monthly or quarterly basis, is always highly recommended. So we've talked about balancing, we've talked about doing some self-internal audits, the Coda Analysis, which we can look at lots of codes in the program, looking at calls that met timely filing or didn't meet timely filing, how to look at those calls that need to be reviewed, those calls sitting in a no bill sent type event. We talked about looking at all of the calls that were dated 2016 versus those that were entered in 2016, and also what does your accounts receivable look like. Do we have any questions? Seeing no questions, I'd like to thank you all for your participation, and as always, happy holidays from us here at TriTech.